Nestled amid rolling green hills and vast pastures, the small rural town of Aberdeen, New South Wales, appeared idyllic. A place where the air smelled of eucalyptus, where farmers tended to their livestock, and where neighbors knew one another by name. Life moved at a peaceful, steady rhythm, or so it seemed. But beneath this tranquil facade, a storm was quietly brewing. At the heart of this tempest was Katherine Knight, a woman whose troubled past and chilling crimes would cement her name as one of Australia's most infamous figures. This is the harrowing story of Katherine Knight, a tale of violence, obsession, and unimaginable horror. Born on October 24, 1955 in Tenterfield, New South Wales, Katherine Knight entered a world marked by dysfunction and violence. Her mother, Barbara Ruffin, had left her first husband, Jack Ruffin, to be with Ken Knight, a violent alcoholic known for his explosive temper. The scandal caused social ostracism, forcing the family into a life of isolation. Barbara and Ken's union was anything but harmonious. Ken frequently subjected Barbara to brutal physical and sexual abuse, incidents that young Katherine often witnessed. Barbara, embittered by her circumstances, would confide in Katherine about the grotesque details of her relationship, instilling a warped perception of love and intimacy in her daughter. Despite the abuse, Katherine focused on the future, telling herself that although her life was miserable now, she would one day have her own family to care for in the way she wished her family had cared for her. School offered little reprieve. Katherine was known for her explosive temper and frequent outbursts. Despite struggling academically, she displayed a strange duality: fierce loyalty to those she cared for and a terrifying outburst of violence when slighted. By her teenage years, Katherine had developed a fascination with knives. She idolized her job at the local abattoir when she was hired in 1971, becoming the first woman to work on the slaughter line, cutting out the internal organs of animals. It was a role that suited her unsettling interests. Skinning and butchering animals with precision became a source of pride. Her colleagues often remarked on her unusual enthusiasm for the grisly aspects of the job. Katherine even hung her prized set of butcher knives above her bed, claiming they were always within reach in case she needed them. This macabre display foreshadowed the horrors yet to come. Katherine's romantic relationships were as turbulent as her upbringing. Her first significant relationship was with David Kellett, a truck driver known for heavy drinking and brawling. Katherine matched his aggression blow for blow. On their wedding night, Knight and Kellett consummated their marriage 3 times. When he fell asleep, Knight wanted a 4th round, and since her husband was exhausted and couldn't oblige to her demand, she started to strangle him. Despite this rocky beginning, they lived together for 10 years and had a daughter. However, Katherine's violent outbursts escalated, leading to an incident where she placed their infant daughter on a railway track shortly before a train was due. Miraculously, the baby was rescued unharmed. Katherine was briefly institutionalized, but was soon released. Her subsequent relationships followed a similar pattern. Each partner faced Katherine's volatile temper, enduring physical assaults and threats. Yet none of these violent episodes would compare to what lay ahead with John Charles Thomas Price. John Price, affectionately known as Pricey, was a respected miner and father of 3. Known for his easygoing nature and generosity, Price had already endured a failed marriage when he met Katherine in 1995. Son seemed fundamentally different from the other men she had dated. He was empathetic to her troubled past and genuinely cared for her, wanting to take her under his wing. Katherine fell head over heels for John, and it seemed he felt the same way about her. That year, Katherine moved into John's house, where he lived with his 3 young daughters, who quickly took a liking to her. For the first time, Katherine felt her life was going the way she wanted. Unfortunately, this would not last. Despite the seemingly perfect start, their relationship began to sour when Katherine asked John if they would ever marry. Katherine wanted to officially have a family of her own, but John, wary from a failed marriage, told her he might never want to marry again. This issue drove them apart, culminating in a heated fight in early February 2000. During the altercation, Katherine grabbed a knife and slashed John across the chest. The fight ended abruptly, with John screaming at her to leave and never return. Both understood that a line had been crossed, and their relationship was likely over. John took out a restraining order against her in an attempt to keep his children safe. Toward the end of the month, Price let on that he was concerned for his safety and told his co-workers that if he ever went missing, it was because Knight killed him. In the following days and weeks, Katherine, who had moved to a nearby apartment, felt lonely. Despite knowing the relationship was unhealthy, she longed to patch things up with John. She decided to use a tactic she had employed in past relationships, ensuring they had the house to themselves, showing up in lingerie, and hoping for an intimate reconciliation. On February 29th, Katherine waited until John left for work, then went to his house, where she still had a key. She chatted with his daughters and arranged for them to stay with a babysitter overnight. After the babysitter picked up the girls, Katherine left to buy lingerie. Later that evening, John returned home to find his children gone and a note from Katherine explaining their whereabouts and her desire to make up with him. John was angry that she had entered his home uninvited and made decisions about his children without consulting him. He grabbed a beer and sat in the living room, waiting for her return. By 11 p.m., Katherine had still not returned. John, exhausted from working early mornings, decided to go to bed. He climbed into bed, falling asleep almost instantly. Roughly an hour later, Katherine walked into the bedroom, wearing a black lingerie she had purchased earlier that day. Though John had been furious, seeing her like this made him reconsider his anger. Intimacy followed, and the two eventually fell asleep in each other's arms. Later that night, Katherine woke up, her demeanor shifting dramatically. As John slept soundly, Katherine stared at him, overwhelmed by a sudden wave of contempt and disgust. Convinced that John was using her and had no intention of marrying her, she became consumed with the need for retribution. Retrieving her meticulously maintained butcher knives, Katherine returned to the bedroom. Straddling John carefully to avoid waking him, she raised one knife high and plunged it into his chest. The sudden violent impact jolted John awake. Bucking in agony, he threw Katherine off and instinctively fled the room despite his grievous injuries. Staggering through the house, blood pouring from his wounds, John made it to the front door. He managed to open it, but collapsed halfway between the threshold and the porch. Desperate to escape, he grasped at the edge of the door, leaving a bloody handprint smeared on its surface. Katherine, undeterred by his attempts to flee, rushed forward, seized his legs, and dragged him back inside. With chilling determination, she shut the door, climbed on top of him, and stabbed him 36 more times until he lay lifeless. Katherine's depravity did not end with John's murder. In the aftermath, she methodically skinned his body from neck to toe, displaying the expertise honed from years at the abattoir. Remarkably, she managed to remove his skin in a single piece, which she then hanged over the entrance to a closet. She decapitated John and placed his head in a pot of boiling water, intending to create a gruesome broth or gravy. The skinned torso was butchered and cooked into various dishes, including pies and casseroles. Plates were meticulously arranged around the dining table, complete with name cards for each of John's children. Her aim: to feed John's children their father's body. At some point, Katherine sat down to consume the ghastly meal she had prepared, but was overcome with nausea. She threw her portion out of the window into the backyard. After realizing the gravity of her actions, Katherine attempted to take her own life by overdosing on sleeping pills. She collapsed in the living room, surrounded by the carnage she had created. When paramedics arrived the following morning, they managed to revive her. Police officers, summoned by concerned colleagues when John failed to show up for work, were confronted with a crime scene so horrifying that seasoned detectives broke down in tears. Katherine was promptly arrested and charged with murder. Initially pleading not guilty, she later changed her plea to guilty, sparing Price's family the anguish of a trial. Despite her defense team's attempts to argue diminished responsibility due to mental illness, the evidence of premeditation was irrefutable. In November 2001, Katherine Knight was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, the first woman in Australian history to receive such a sentence. The presiding judge described her crime as appalling and almost beyond contemplation. Katherine Knight's crime shocked a nation that prided itself on rural values and close-knit communities. Her actions not only shattered the peace of Aberdeen, but also challenged societal assumptions about female criminality. Violence had long been perceived as a predominantly male domain. Yet Katherine's case forced Australians to confront the uncomfortable reality of extreme female-perpetrated violence. Scholars and media commentators debated the influences of her traumatic upbringing, mental health issues, and societal norms that may have contributed to her descent into madness. The aftermath of the crime also renewed conversations about domestic violence and mental health, prompting calls for better support systems for both perpetrators and victims. Today, Katherine Knight resides in Silverwater Women's Correctional Center, where she is reportedly a model prisoner. Yet her name continues to evoke horror, a grim reminder of the depths of human depravity. The pastures of Aberdeen still whisper their secrets, but among those whispers lingers the echo of a night when love turned to terror and a woman became a monster. If you enjoyed this story and want more, kindly support us by subscribing to this channel and join us as we delve into the shadows of history.